Welcome GRD1332, Typography 1, and this is ex2, Tracing E, and we'll be doing that. We'll be tracing the letter E, and we'll be doing that to learn about the vector properties of different fonts, both sans-serif fonts and serif fonts. So what you're going to do is go to Unit 3, and you'll look for the shared link from Gravit. So you'll click on this first. Now when you turn it in, you'll click on this, but now you'll go here. And whether you're logged in or not, I logged out. So I'm going to have to log back in just to see that experience as well. And this is the shared link, and it says create a free account or log in. So I'm going to log in. And now I'm logged in. I could close this up. I could close this up. If there's ever an update, you could always run an update, but it usually auto updates. And I'm going to save it to my account. So I'm going to go up here and go File, Save to Cloud As, and if I have a 132 folder, I'll put it in there. If I don't, I'll make one. It looks like I don't have one. This is a different account, so I'll make a folder here, and I'll call it 132 or GRD132, and I'll just put Spring 22 and hit Create, and I'll save it in here. And down at the bottom, you can just save over the name. Sometimes it's hard to see, but just put your last name, first initial. You don't have to put any extension or anything. And there's not a save button, so you just have to hit enter. And then you should be all ready to go. Just make sure it syncs over here before you get started. And remember, if there's an asterisk here, it's unsaved. Otherwise, it's saved. And you could always use this little save button here. And again, we have the letter E here. Now, these are actual letters. And I think this is crimson text, and I think this is archivo, sans serif, serif. I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see these letters a little bit better. Now they're kind of grayed out. I have the opacity turned down. They're on their own layer called letters, and I have them locked, so you can just trace over them. And one thing just to point out, and why we're doing this in the first place, if I unlock them, now you don't have to unlock them, but if I unlock them and click on them with my sub-select tool, here's this one. You could see all these letters are composed of anchor points. They've been converted to outlines from their original text, but that's how basically fonts are created, out of outlines, out of vectors. So I'm going to have you learn how to create that a little. You don't have to be perfect. Maybe you haven't done this before, maybe you have, but you don't have to be perfect, but you'll learn a little bit about the makeup of the strokes of both sans serif and serif letters. And I just picked the letter E just because I thought that would be easy, and we'll talk about some of the terms as we do that. So anyway, I'll close this up and I'll lock it again so we don't mess with it. And what we're going to be doing is tracing with the pen tool, and we'll start with easy ones, sans serif, because they have more uniform lines. So they're just straight lines. So this E we could just crank out in no time. This will be a little longer because there's curves here, but you'll learn how to do vector curves. This one, we actually can use this one and just skew it because it's really no different. The oblique style of a sans serif is really just on a tilt. The oblique style of sans serif fonts is really just on a tilt, so we can just skew it. So we don't even have to trace this one. Now, these will take a little time because they have lots of little curves, but that'll be fun. And it'll be better than just kind of searching fonts and looking at fonts. So I just wanted to give you something to do that's a little more hands-on. So let's get started. So I'm going to zoom into my big E, capital E, on the sans serif font. And you could kind of fill up the screen if you want to. Get it all set up really nice. We are going to use this to color, so I'm going to use the pen tool. And I actually have this set up already. You may not, so just double check that you have the border set up for 1 pixel. And I made it burgundy just because it'll be easier to see. And I don't have any fill. So if you do have a fill there, you could delete it. So if it starts making a white fill or anything, you could just use the trash can to delete the fill. But I just want a border. So that's what I want to work with. And that's what I was working with last time. So I think that's why it's coming up like this. So if yours doesn't, you can change it. So I'm going to just trace this. Now you could start at any corner with the pen tool. Again, using the pen tool. And this just clicks and makes straight lines. So I'm going to click and then move down here to another corner and click. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to click. And you can even hold shift, which will force straight lines, meaning they'll be perpendicular at 90 degrees. So I can hold shift and go over here. That way you don't make any crooked lines. And you could hold shift the whole time you do this. You may get it perfect, you may not. You can always nudge them when you're done. And remember, these are the arms coming off the stem of the E. We'll talk about that. And this is, again, a capital E, a sans-serif font called Archivo. And when you finish up, when you see green like that, just kind of make sure they're all green and you're right on top. There's a little circle on top of the pen, and just click. That'll close it up so it's a closed font. Now, I think I might have been off a little. I may have to either move this one down or move this one up. Now, before you move any of these, you have to use this tool, not the pointer. It's called the sub-select tool. And I'll even zoom in a little bit. I'll do Command plus. If you're on Windows, do Control plus. Now that needs to go up a little, so I'm going to select that anchor point, and I'm just going to use my arrow on my keyboard and just nudge it up once. And everything else looks pretty good. I think it looks pretty good from what I did. So that's it. I don't have to do anything else. Now later we can fill it and take away the stroke, so it's actually our version. Now you can even go over here, since you're done with it, you could just call it Cap E, and you could put sans, just so you know that's the Cap E for sans. And other than just saying path, so I could do that, Cap E sans, or you could just put sans and write a capital E. So that's the first one. That was pretty easy because it's all straight lines. Now we're going to do some curves with the pen tool. So I'm going to move down here, and we're going to click and drag. Instead of just clicking, we're going to click and drag as we go with this. And if you've never done this, it may be a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's a little easier than in Gravit than doing it in Illustrator. So I'm going to go back to my pen tool now. Remember, we use our sub-select when we're manipulating the points, these anchor points, and we're going to use the pen tool when we're drawing them. Now I'm going to start here. I'll start with a straight line. Now I'm going to do the outside first, then I'll do the inside, which is the eye. So I'll do the kind of the bowl of the E, and then I'll go in and I'll do the eye. So I'm going to start here, and I'll just click. Now since this is a straight line, I'm just going to click, and you could hold Shift if you want, and I'll go here. Now I'm going to go up here, maybe midway across. And instead of just clicking, I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to drag this way, sideways. I'll put a little arrow there in the video. So I'm going to drag that way. So I'm going to click and drag. Now I'm a little off. I was a little up high, but I'll fix that later. And then I'm just going to drag across and try to line that over there on the right side as best I can. And that's it. I'm going to leave go. And then I don't have to click yet. I'm just going to kind of move my mouse down about halfway down this curve, right about there, and that looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to click once because it's already laying on the curve, so I'm going to click, and then I'm going to go down here and kind of midway where I was with the other one, and I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to drag this way just like I did with the other one, and try to lay it as nice as I can on the line. You can see I'm a little down further than I need to be, but that's okay. And then once I have it laid down on the left side, I'm going to just leave go. And then I'm going to just move up here, and I'm going to kind of lay it down and just click once. And then go over here and click. And then same thing down here. I'm going to go halfway around this little bowl of the curve here, of the bottom kind of tail on the E. I'm not even sure if that's the right term, but it's kind of finishing off the bowl. But I'm going to go down in the bottom part of the bowl, and I'm going to go about halfway. And I'm just going to click and drag and kind of lay it in there nicely and try to keep this thing as perpendicular as I can, as straight as I can, and then leave go. And then I should be able to go up here and just click right when you see green on there. Try to make sure there's not two. Make sure you go right on top of it with the tip of the pen. And even if it's not perfect, that's okay. And I see a little circle there, and I'm just going to click once. Click. And I'm done. Now, to tweak it, I'm just going to go to my sub-select and select this, and I'm just going to nudge down with my arrow key. That looks good. Over here, I'm going to click on here and maybe pull this handle out just a little bit so it lays in there. And then this point, I'm just going to nudge up with my arrow key. Let me move down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. So you can see it's down a little further. I'm going to just nudge up. And that's pretty good. That's pretty damn perfect. For the first time of doing that. So that's the outside of the E. I still have to do the I. Now that won't be that hard. It's just a line, and then I'm going to click and drag here, so it's just a half circle. You could try to make a circle and chop it in half, but as long as you're working with the pen tool, we're going to go here, and I'll start over here and do the straight line first, and I'll click, and then I'll go over here, and you can hold Shift if you want to keep it perfectly straight. It doesn't hurt to do that, because even if you think it's straight, you may not. So when you hold Shift, it'll make it perfect. And I'll click, and then I'll go up here halfway, kind of halfway on the arch up here. Now, there is a way you can almost go all the way around, but I think it's better to go halfway up here, and then just click across and kind of lay that right side of the arch in, and then I should be able to go down here and lay down the bottom of the arch right on top, and make sure it's just, you see nothing but green, and then just click once. And that's pretty good. I don't think I have to do anything else. Now, always get off of that tool so that you're not clicking around. So get off of that tool. I'm actually going to go to the pointer because I'm not going to change anything. What I am going to do is I'm going to highlight both of these paths. Now, if you look over here, you'll see path, path. Now, it doesn't matter what they are because we're going to join them together and make a compound path so that this is the negative space or the hole, and this is the solid space. Now, again, we're just on top of the gray one, so what we have right now, if I turned this off, that's what we have right now. But what I'll do next is I'll go over here and use one of these compound path operations. They're like pathfinders in Illustrator. And I'll go down here and I'll do subtract. Now, what subtract does is it takes the top shape and it punches a hole out of it. So it'll punch a hole out of it and they'll become one compound path, meaning the two paths, the inside and the outside, will become one, that's the way the letter E is. It's a compound path because the fill is on this area here, not on here. We don't put white in here or anything like that. So we're going to subtract the top path, which is the little half circle, from the other shape that we made. And once we do that, it says compound shape. Now we're going to make it permanent because right now it's not permanent. There's still two parts of it in here, and we might as well make it permanent. To make it permanent, go here to the convert to path and just hit that squiggle button right there. Now it says compound path, and you could call that sans E, and the other one will be like, you could call it small e or whatever. I'll just call it sans E. I should change these names, but we know what they are. So that's the sans E, and that was pretty easy to do. Now, to make the other E, this will be easy, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll work on the serif one. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit because I'm going to copy this one. I don't have to trace this because what I can do is just take this shape, and that's why you want to make sure, well, let me hit enter so so my name change is permanent. So this is one path. It's a compound path, but we converted it into one path. And I'm going to copy this. So sometimes the easiest way to copy it is just to do Command D or do Edit, Duplicate. And there's the second one. And I'm going to go down here and just kind of drag it and put it right over this one. And then I'll zoom in. And then I'll even call this, I'll double click on this one. And I know this is the one I'm on because it's targeted, it's in gray. So I'll double click on this and I'll just call it oblique, because oblique indicates that it's just on a slant. It's not really italic. So we'll say oblique, and I'll kind of line it up a little. I don't think this one is exactly perfect, but I'm just going to nudge it over a little. Now, I didn't even go in and worry about my anchor points yet, and I don't have to. I'm just going to line it up so the bottoms are pretty good. And what I'll do is I'll go over here to transform, and I'll just click on the button. It's just like an on-off button. I'll click on it. And then instead of grabbing this, I'm going to grab here right on the line, not the rotate one, but where it goes kind of back and forth. You see two little arrows going back and forth like that. And I'm just going to drag to the right, just slightly. And it kind of skewed it. And it's not going to be perfect, but that's pretty damn good for doing that. So I just wanted to show that an oblique is really not any kind of variation other than it's just skewed. Now I could go here and just kind of squash this ever so slightly, and that's pretty perfect. The E's a little off, but again, I use the letters separately. I actually used the oblique, so I did not skew it the first time. So there's some little minor change there. You could always move the anchor points around if you want to. There's no reason you couldn't go in here on your sub-select. Now, even if it's compound, you could still bump that down. I could go here, bump that down with I'm just using my arrow on my arrow key. And bump this down maybe a little, and maybe bump this in. I'm just using one bump on my arrow key on my keyboard, and that's pretty good. That's the oblique, and it's just showing that this is basically a variation, not really a different font. It's really the same font, and it's just skewed. So the transform we did is a skew. Sometimes it's called shearing. That term, and Illustrator has tools for that, but we're just kind of doing that manually. So let me zoom out here. I'll do Command 0. And look at all three of my shapes. So these are my three shapes. I did the cap E, which is sans. I did the small e, which is sans. And I did the oblique E, which is sans. and manipulating anchor points. I'm using the sub-select tool, but I'll go back to my pointer right now. And if I want to, I could highlight all of these, and I think I can change the color of them. I can add a fill just by hitting add, and I'll go here and just whatever color, I'll give it that same burgundy color, and I'll click off, and then I'll highlight them all again. You could highlight them here too. Select one and then hold shift and select the last one. It'll select all three. And I'm just going to delete the border. I don't need a border on it. And then they're just filled with that color. So those are vector shapes that I made. And those were a little easier because they're sans-serif fonts and they're fairly uniform in their thickness. Now, this one's going to be a little more challenging, so is this, and so is this. So that'll take a little longer, but hopefully we got a little more practice doing this and you're getting familiar with the tool. Now there's a lot of little subtleties in here, but that's why we're doing it. I want you to learn about the subtleties and the shapes of a serif font as opposed to a sans-serif font. So we'll pick this up in part 2.